Welcome everyone to Startup Stories. Our guest today is Karthik Ranganathan, the founder and CTO of Yugabyte. Karthik, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
And Karthik, I'm excited about this one. I want to talk about more of the story of you founding Yugabyte, the story of you creating and then naming what we now know as Cassandra, and your journey of selecting Google Cloud. But to start things off, you're coming off a $48 million round of funding earlier this year, following a $30 million round last year. All of this in the midst of the pandemic. What's been the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome over the last couple of years?
Yeah, when you talk about the biggest challenge, Ryan, I can think of it in two dimensions. Biggest challenge as far as Yugabyte, the company, or the biggest challenges as far as Yugabyte DB, the actual database, right, the product. So maybe we just do both, right? In terms of the company, I would say the biggest challenge, maybe I'll do it the other way. The biggest challenge in terms of the product, right, has been, the level to, just as a recap, what Yugabyte DB does as a product is to bring, the cutting edge power of traditional RDBMS to a cloud native application set, right? So that means you should be able to build cloud native applications the way you would have built them, except on a database that is cloud native. So that means it can, be highly available, scalable, and resilient, and replicate data and all of that good stuff. And we picked the PostgreSQL as the database to completely support all the features of. So we reuse the upper half of Postgres. Now all of that is goodness, but the biggest challenge is Postgres is a mature and complex code base. And our undertaking to build the lower half of the database in a completely replicated, shared nothing, cloud native manner is also pretty complex. And bringing these two together and supporting the really wide array of Postgres features to spec, right? Like, try and match the transaction failure semantics, or try and match the feature set and the data types, everything, right? That's been really incredibly challenging in a good way, right? And so we have an all-star team working on it. So again, it's been a challenge though, and it's been fun. In terms of the company side, I'd say the biggest challenge has been messaging, right? It's just so hard to explain in 2 to 3 words what a company does, right? And I often find that the time spent on messaging is inversely proportional to the length of the messaging itself, right? So if you can give me 3 paragraphs, it's a lot easier. 3 sentences, a little harder. 3 words, oh man, that's incredibly hard, right? So we experimented with, and if you think about what the database does, it brings the best of the SQL and NoSQL world together, right? And lets you run it in a cloud native database as a service fashion, right? That's really what it does. But, there's no clean way to explain that to the end user. So, we tried converging SQL and NoSQL, but nobody knew what to make of that. And then we said, converging databases and workloads, and that was even worse than the previous. And so we went through our sequence of iterations until now we're at a high performance distributed SQL database, which really is catching on, and people really are taking to distributed SQL. So.
No, I love your thought. There's speaking to messaging. There's a quote that I love. I think it's Mark Twain, and it says, "Sorry, I would have used less words, but I didn't have enough time."
That's right. Exactly. Well said. He probably knew he had to do a couple of those.
It's amazing though how complex it is to make something so simple and tangible and easy to understand.
Fully agree, yeah.
So, I'd alluded to, the funding and mentioned that much of that has been focused toward accelerating the launch of Yugabyte's fully managed cloud offering. And exciting news for both Google and Yugabyte is today we're announcing GA for Yugabyte Cloud. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh yeah, this has been in the making for a while, with a lot of technical depth and underpinnings. And our aim, like I said, was to simplify application development so people can pick this database and know it supports everything they need and build their applications and have it evolve into the future and support whatever it is they need. Now, we just took the next step and made it even more simple and effortless so that people can consume this as a fully managed service. So they don't have to worry about, standing up servers and installing things and running it and backups and encryption and the 25 other things that go with, running a database in production. When in reality, businesses that should be focused on what drives their business, what drives the business innovation, right? The core features and products that will make their business more likable for their customers, improve their satisfaction, expand their markets and so on. So super excited to announce that, the fully managed service of Yugabyte DB on, Google Cloud as well. And that's been an incredible journey. It's really about working with your team on the Google side as well as our folks, really trying to get the best out of the architecture, and as a result, give both the best experience as well as at the best price point for our joint customers. So it's really incredible. It's been a fun journey.
Yeah, and I'm excited to speak more to that in the partnership with Google. I want to make sure I mention, I believe we are announcing a special credit offer, so we'll provide more information on that after. For Google customers, if you want to try Yugabyte Cloud, we're going to make that easy to do so. So taking a step back, and I guess I want to hear a bit more about the founding story and your story leading up to founding Yugabyte.
Sure, yeah. I think I've been working on distributed systems and databases for, I don't know, a really long time, like 10, 15 years now, almost in that range. So a quick recap of where it all started for me was at Facebook back in 2007 when I joined. Myself and a couple of others, we worked on, there were no distributed. Again, I just want to set the context. 2007, there were no distributed databases. There was no NoSQL. There was no, cloud was not really there. Like no one really knew that the cloud would take off, that open source databases would take off. There were no SSDs, like just a different era, right? So at Facebook, our first challenge that we had to solve was we had a lot of data by virtue of building search indexes for the messaging product that we had inside, like it was called Facebook Messages back then. And this was a write heavy workload. Like it would definitely not fit on a single machine. And we wanted to be able to make something that was operationally very easy, that could survive failures of data centers, but could take and store all of that data. And we ended up building what you now know as Apache Cassandra. So we built it and open sourced it out of Facebook. And subsequently, we actually built the Facebook Messenger product, as you know it today, which unifies messaging, SMS, chat, and everything together into a single product where the mantra was, if you need to tell somebody something, just say, don't worry about which medium you would use, right? And this person responds to messages, the other person responds to SMS, and so on, that they could tweak the preferences themselves. And that obviously also meant a lot of write throughput. And so we, again, worked on and got HBase into production. And I think what was really unique more than anything else, we built these couple of new databases that were completely new, and NoSQL was new, and multi-node federation of data and queries was new. But most of all, I think what I appreciate the most retrospectively is the fact that we were a team that was not just building the database, but also running it at a massive scale in production, right? So not too many teams in the world claim to be can have the good luck of being on both sides, right, of building and running it, and at scale too, right? Like we're talking petabytes of data, billions of operations a day, and we were paged at 3 a.m. We had to deal with decommissioning data centers, the whole 9 yards, right? So incidentally, I'd say nothing like a 3 a.m. wake up call or a set of them to really teach you how to build and what to build really quickly, right? So we went through that, and subsequently, I went to Nutanix, worked on distributed storage. So this was the storage layer. You can think of it as the block store, right, for private clouds. And there it was distributed systems nevertheless, but it really exposed me to the enterprise side of the world and what enterprise customers look for. And Facebook is necessarily a tech company, right? So where you could have amorphously defined APIs on a database, but the core properties of the database mattered more. However, for the enterprise, not only is that important, the APIs matter too, because there's such a wide variety of applications that enterprises build, which is fascinating, right? So, and coming off the two, the experience with Facebook kind of taught me and my co-founders and everybody, like I met both my co-founders at Facebook. The core team at Yugabyte, the engineering team, is out of Facebook, the founding team. But, we all knew, for building cloud native applications, you needed a new breed of databases, right? And the world, from the enterprise experience, we knew that this had to be a known API, SQL, because, who wants a new database in a new language that somebody has to struggle for a couple of years to learn, and then they figure out, oops, it doesn't really fit all my workloads. Now let me get a couple more databases. So that's no fun. So
absolutely. And enter, systems like Cassandra or databases like Cassandra, and the responsibility for naming that ultimately came on your shoulders, correct?
Yeah. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Well, that's a funny story too. Well, everyone, including myself, was so busy building the database, no one really had time to think of a name. So, we just called it a peer storage distributed system or something, and nobody really thought that was a good name. That was too generic. So the name, the onus finally fell on me because the others were too busy. And so my take was any good database had to be named after Oracle. And because Oracle, after all, is a marvel, it's an amazing database in any right. And so when I looked it up, the best known Oracle was the Oracle of Delphi, but Delphix was already taken, so I didn't want to go after that. So the next most known Oracle, or the only one that I could find, was Cassandra, right? So and that was it. So that was the one that it had to be. And little did I know back then it would even become a thing, because we were going to open source the database after we named it, and we didn't really think much of that either. But then suddenly everyone's using Cassandra and everyone knows about it. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe we should have thought a little more. But it is what it is. So.
No, I love the story. So moving more to Yugabyte. I mean, tell us more about Yugabyte's mission, kind of the company mission, and what you're helping customers achieve.
Sure. Yeah. I think our mission is to simplify cloud native applications. So in a nutshell. So this means that if you think about applications and how they have changed, right, there's a couple of things that are happening. You definitely need your applications to be highly available today, because, and this was the case before also, but before you would run it on custom hardware, right, which is very resilient to failure and purpose built to be up all the time. Whereas today you're running it on whatever the cloud provides you, which is commodity hardware, right, a lot cheaper. But you should failures are baked into the equation. They're just going to happen, right? Like it's just an economy of scale thing. So the first thing that had to change was the availability characteristics of the database. It had to be continuously available, right? Whether you're doing backups or failures or whatever it is. The second thing about the cloud is, I remember, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when you had to build an application, the first thing you did was order machines, right? That's what we did at Facebook. It's like, doesn't matter how many machines you need, just order it. Even if you don't know, just order something, because it's going to take a year for things to come, and you can build a plenty of things in a year, right? But today, those machines are in a matter of a minute or two, right? The public clouds like GCP just give it to you in a matter of a couple of minutes. So you really can't do anything useful in a couple of minutes. So that means you now have to think about, how do you scale on the fly? How do you build really quickly and release? So it's that piece, right? The feature set, the scalability, all the real-time stuff. The third big change is, back then you were lucky if you had 2 data centers. Most of people had just one. And if you had 2 data centers, no one really operated active out of both, because that's crazy. Why would you do it? You would just keep the data in the second data center and know you have a path to recovery. This was most enterprises back then, right? Well, today that number has changed to, I don't know, 200, 300, 400, a lot of big, like these data centers all over the place that are accessible. And in Google itself, right, there's like, I don't know, 20, 30 regions, more than that, maybe, like all over the world. So not having a data center is no longer an excuse. And, all of these data centers are pretty easy to programmatically set up. So infrastructure as code became a thing. So now replication of data and moving data across regions becomes very important, right? So to recap, we talked about 4 things. We talked about building your apps really fast, because you're ordering the machines is not going to save you and give you the time to do so. We talked about always being available. We talked about scale, in and out on demand, and replicating data, right? So these are the characteristics that the database takes upon itself from the data perspective, trying to simplify and give agility and time and freedom back to developers.
It's amazing. And you have to be careful for what you wish for, because the problems of 10 years ago are solved in a lot of ways now, but it's opened up a Pandora's box of all sorts of new problems.
Exactly. Like for example, 10 years ago, you just pick one of the RDBMSs and that's it. There's no question, right? But today, if you try to go and do the same thing in the cloud, you have to think about, hey, how do I replicate it? How do I keep it up and running? How do I do this? How do I do that? And 25 other things, right? So those are the things that we're doing. But you're right. So even though on the surface, at least for Yugabyte DB, one of our conscious decisions, because one of the key questions, the acid test, so to speak, to starting the company was, hey, why do you want to build another database? There's like 250 databases out there, right? Couldn't you just pick one and improve it? And what people were really telling us, when you read between the lines, is that don't build a new API and stress my brain out trying to learn what it is. And it doesn't matter if it promises the moon. There's 250 out there. The reality of the world is I have to deal with a bunch of these already. So we took the other decision of saying, you know what, we're not innovating on the API layer. They are right. There's a lot of them. We're just going to extend it a little bit and make sure it works well for transactional applications in the cloud, right? And so that brings the challenge of meeting the bar on what the traditional database is set, but meeting it in the cloud native world, right? So which is pretty interesting and challenging at the same time.
So let's talk about the partnership with Google, and take me back initially. What led your company to just evaluate and ultimately select? And I don't know if there was a defining moment or things that you learned along the way, but to kind of select GCP to partner with and build your product on top of.
Yeah, I think See, first off, it was a no-brainer for us because we were already using Google Cloud for a lot of our internal build, test dev, dev dev machines for for our developers to work on. So we were using Google Cloud, so we were somewhat familiar with it. Like I'd say, we learned a lot more as we were building the cloud, but it was not without familiarity. And we think it's amazing technology. It's really well created, well crafted, clean APIs, really easy to understand, pretty intuitive. So overall, we did know it, have a liking for it. Secondly, we like the fact that we feel Google and GCP and Yugabyte are pretty aligned philosophically as well in trying to support open source. Like Yugabyte is an open source company. Our database is 100% open source, just like Postgres. We are completely pro open sourcing core pieces of infrastructure, because when companies tend to bet their very critical workloads on them, their actual dollar making applications running on top of this piece of infrastructure, it is important for them to have both the transparency and, if needed, the control, right, where they can build features if they need to. And GCP and Google have a long history of supporting open source, which is like a huge plus for us, and it's like kind of birds of a feather kind of thing. Well, the other thing that I'd say is that GCP does share a vision for hybrid and multi-cloud work, right? So if you think about Kubernetes in general, and well, by the way, Kubernetes is open source too, which is one of the examples. But in Kubernetes, in addition to being open source, also enables multi-cloud and hybrid, and Anthos is another example. And so there's a lot of that multi-cloud and hybrid cloud being recognizing it as a first-class citizen and doing so. So that's pretty important to us as well, right? So yeah, a bunch of reasons. I mean, least of all, not to mention, we had a lot of our customers ask for this, so that always helps the case. And in addition to being pretty cost effective, right, for what you can offer with respect to performance, and what we can offer jointly to our customers with respect to value for the cost.
No, it's great to hear. And were there any specific challenges that your team was up against that Google technology kind of helped solve or account for or improve?
I mean, yes, absolutely. So there were a few. I would say the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more than this, but the first thing that comes to mind was like a lot of our team, we like the Google's abstraction in terms of projects in Google Cloud, where you can cleanly segment different use cases out and kind of encapsulate whatever happens inside a project, and have the billing and accountability and view and permissions at the project level, which makes this really nice and clean and easy to use. So that's a really big plus. I'd say the second thing that we really liked about Google Cloud is the APIs, where a lot of things you could change on the fly dynamically, right? With respect to nodes, or spinning up nodes with respect to the sizing of disks, all of this stuff you could do dynamically. The third thing that was really cool was around the Kubernetes itself, right, where you could have auto scaling, and you could build a number of these features pretty easily, right? And Google's GKE, right, is really intuitive and easy to use. So we use that for a few things. And so, yeah, I'd say these are some of the things top of mind. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of others behind these.
Yeah, great to hear. And then just to round things out, I mean, how has the experience been partnering with Google to this point? What are you most excited about as you think towards the future?
Yeah, I think like Google's been great. It's been great working with your team. They've been amazingly supportive. It's really been a pleasure, right? So I'd say on the product launch side, the client teams, they really leaned in to support our launch. Like what we're talking about here is about our launch. So it's an amazing example of how the partnership, right, like that, we're able to strike up and help each other out, and then you guys supporting us through this. This is amazing. The second thing is how GCP has leaned into the go-to-market support, right? Like we're engaged heavily with like the database leads globally on your side, right? And the aim is to really deliver customers and users better value, right? So that our joint customers are really happy with what they see and really can have access to the value, right? And the third thing I'd say is there is strong interest that we're seeing from small and medium businesses and enterprises alike in the GCP marketplace, the Google marketplace, right? And so that's another place where we've collaborated closely and worked with the team to get things done. I mean, these are just a few examples. There's a whole bunch of others that we've also leveraged, like including, like we said, like the architects on your side to really understand the layout of Google Cloud, and how networking works, and how the pricing around networking works. Just a lot of other stuff, right? So it's been amazing. I mean, we hope to continue the journey. Our scale here is ramping up quite rapidly. We're seeing a lot of interest from, large customers, large use cases. So, we hope to keep the partnership going. We hope to leverage, newer technologies that Google's bringing out, like Anthos, like others, right? And really see how we can bring more value to our joint customers.
Yeah, and I think we're excited about it as well. And going back to Yugabyte Cloud, what makes the product unique? I mean, give me kind of a double click on, you talked about, hey, the world doesn't necessarily need, there's a lot of databases already out there. But what's the secret sauce? I mean, what do you think customers are going to find the most appealing?
Yeah, I can tell you that the Yugabyte DB is the only database that completely supports Postgres on the upper half, right? By reusing the code, nonetheless. So it's compatible to a fault, right? Like I'd say it's not just like all the features, everything. If the application before was talking to Postgres, it's still talking to the upper half of Postgres, right? So that's the first part where extreme familiarity and extreme compatibility is something that we're going for. And while doing that, we're able to give you, internally replicated but highly available and on-demand scalable database. So that really means build your app on Postgres, which is what most people are doing today anyway. But if you're able to run it on Yugabyte, which you should, if it runs on Postgres, you should be able to run it on Yugabyte. With just a few tweaks, you'll be able to unlock the power of a cloud native version of Postgres, and you should be able to scale into whatever level you need and derive whatever level of availability you need, right? So that's the first unique thing. The second thing I'd say that's unique is about our replication capabilities, right? So I mean, now you pair that with Google's strong networking, that really makes it a huge aha for customers. We're able to do synchronous, asynchronous, geo-partitioned, all kinds of deployments and replication built into the database, as opposed to users having to manage it themselves. The advantage being they can strike accurately the trade-off they need between consistency and performance in the form of latency and getting data to reside in the right geographies for compliance. They'll be able to pick exactly whatever it is that they want to accomplish, right? Which is another unique thing. And lastly, to put a bow on all of this, is going to be extremely simple to do so with Yugabyte Cloud, because a few clicks of a button or an API and you have a cluster running in exactly the set of geographic regions you want with the type of replication that you need. And all of the encryption, the backup, all the hassle, the day-to-day hassle of running the database is completely taken care of for you by a team of people that have done this before at a massive scale, right? So I think that's what we're most excited about the overall cloud launch, right? And we have really cool developer features like the Yugabyte Cloud Shell, where if you want to interact with the database, you just click something, it opens up a shell in your browser. You can start running quick queries against the database that you have on the cloud side. So just nifty little things like this, which will speed up, development and time to, releasing features, because that's the most important thing.
It's exciting. And I think, breaking it down for non-technical listeners, it's about meeting, enterprises and customers where they're at, helping them move faster and really take advantage of some of the benefits that the cloud has to offer. And then augmenting their teams, less work, more work on innovation.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Yep.
So any specific customer stories that come to mind that you guys are excited about and that, other enterprises or customers should know more about?
Yeah, I think there's a few of them. I'll start with the examples of Kroger and Narvar, two of our customers. Both of them are, in the retail vertical, right? And they both are running Yugabyte DB on Google Cloud, right, in order to service their customers. And I mean, as you might imagine, both of them are going through extreme scale challenges, right? By virtue of, during the COVID time, everybody's buying behavior has switched to a lot digital, right? All of us, even myself, everybody, I'm sure yourself, everybody has changed to a lot more digital. So that means there's a lot more things going on that these retailers have to do in order to ensure that they're able to scale and satisfy demand coming in from the digital channel. And if you think about it, the switch was virtually overnight, right? It's happened so rapidly. And couple that with mega events like Black Friday and Cyber Monday and some of these high volume shopping events, right, where it was already digital and a higher digital footprint to begin with, and now you have this kind of shopping, like the peak shopping season also being done in a heavily digital fashion, right? So that's almost a double peak in some sense, right? And while doing so, you still have to accommodate the flurry of of services and features they have to build behind the scenes. Like we sometimes don't realize, like I know this because I was speaking to some of them like in a fireside chat, and it was like really fascinating to see the level of real-time feature releases that they had to do for curbside pickup, for example, right? It's just a checkbox. We do it, we go pick it up, we think it's done. But there's so many things behind the scenes that you have to coordinate in order to make sure all of that happens and the people are able to pick it up and the time windows are picked right, and so on and so forth, right? So all of this is putting is truly bringing what we talked about, like the speed at which you have to build applications to the forefront. So yeah, that's another one. I'd say those are a couple of examples, right? Like I've also seen a lot of the retailers having to now, or retail everywhere, right, on Google Cloud itself, having to go to different regions to have a multi-region deployment. So that's another thing that starts to come up, having data localized in different regions. And so like Narvar, for example, they've talked to us about how if they can move data around into different regions for purposes of compliance, regulatory compliance. They also, like for example, the Montreal region or the Europe region and so on, right? What do they do? How do they replicate data between these? How do they keep their stack in such a way that they are compliant while still being able to, not losing any of their agility in building their applications and so on?
Those are two great examples. I've read a couple of analyst reports. You think about what's trending in the market right now, or what's trending across enterprises, is you have this need for increased development and velocity, which creates challenges with acquiring talent, and everyone's trying to do this. And yeah, great examples. And then you think about kind of the cloud and how, the pandemic has really accelerated the adoption of the cloud in order to meet these demands. I've read a lot of reports. I think it was 2030 is when they anticipated 80-90% of the market to be in the cloud. And a lot of estimates have 2023, 2024.
Yeah, that's right. It's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. The world has really turned, right? It's changed in no time and out of necessity, right? And I could go on with many examples, right? There's another example of a really small company, Abra Controls. These guys are doing the monitoring of the industrial IoT space, oil rigs and gas wells, where you do where you mine for fracking, and where you actually go and mine for some of these things. And they had a similar thing. They knew Postgres really well. They wanted a database that was Postgres compatible because they just know how to build apps really quickly using Postgres, right? But the problem is, as you have these wells that you keep deploying sensors in, and the amount of data that starts coming up goes only one way, which is up, right? It keeps increasing. So they didn't want to be in the business of having to figure out how to scale the database and how to manage it and how to keep it running and how to move it to different geographies. So that's another solution that they used Yugabyte Cloud on GCP as another example. So so my point here was, it's not just the big guys, it's the small guys, it's across the board, right? So
yeah, and in every industry.
Every industry, you're right. Exactly.
So want to move towards personal advice and leveraging some of your experience. To start, what advice would you give to other technical founders who are looking to leverage the cloud to disrupt their markets?
Yeah. I think, okay, the first advice I'm going to give is going to sound crazy, but here it goes. I think the cloud brings us the first opportunity to where you can invert. The traditional cycle is build a product, test it out, and then come back, fix the product, test it out, and iterate that way. With the cloud, you can actually reverse this cycle, right? You can put something together really quickly, but as you speak to customers almost in real time. So you can build the product almost after you figure out the requirements. So you can kind of bring it almost close to that state. So I would encourage people, and in fact, we did that with Yugabyte Cloud. I'd be proud to announce that that's how we did it. So we spoke to a lot of customers where they didn't have the UI or the thing to go sign up on, but they tell us the specs of what it is they wanted, how they wanted to run. We had Slack channels open. They tell us how they wanted to change things, and so we know what they would have done if they had their own UI. But they didn't have a UI, and we were doing it for them, and we were doing it for a select group of people that we thought were pretty representative. We had overwhelming responses, so we picked a group that was representative, that could work with us, that would help us build the product, and then we shaped the product and are releasing it and released it, right? So I would encourage people to think about inverting the order of development as far as they can, because one of the biggest killers, like once you figure out the basic problem of how do you really build quickly and release quickly and your CI/CD and all of that, like of course you got to figure that out. I'm just assuming that's table stakes. one of the biggest problems is building the wrong thing, right? Putting a lot of time into building a feature that maybe two people want, and that's not a good use of time. It's better to be on the set that everybody's asking for. So this is a good way to de-risk that and kind of invert the cycle. The second thing I would say is that with the cloud, everything is accelerated like no tomorrow, right? So it becomes more important to front load the thought about scale and culture in every which way, right? So you got to be in this cultural mode of thinking, move fast, and you will hit the scale at some point. So you have to predict that, whether it be with respect to how many customers you're dealing with, how much data you're dealing with, what is the size of your team to do support. You got to be thinking about this all the time, right? So that's another thing that I'd say. So just a couple of things. If I give too much advice, is equal to no advice. So
no, but points taken. And going back to your first, I've heard a local CTO here in the Northwest. He told me about this concept called Predotyping. And it sounds very, very similar to what you're talking about.
Exactly.
The example that he gave me, he said, say you're running a restaurant, you could spend all sorts of time creating a new dessert offering or a new menu item. And he says, let's say it takes you a few months, you bring it to market, and then you find out no one wants it.
Yep.
And no one's ordering it.
Yeah.
He said, in reverse, why don't you put it on the menu now before you have it?
Yeah.
And let's find out what kind of demand there is for something like this. And then let's go develop it. And I just thought it was so smart to apply a concept like that to business.
Exactly. I think these are all getting unlocked now because we're solving the core challenges of infrastructure, like folks like yourself, like GCP. So it's no longer.
Apologies, I'm getting a call.
They want more of that stuff.
Yeah, we'll get rid of this, so we know it's all authentic. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I think it's now all of the basic problems of how do I stand up my infrastructure? How do I get everything operational? All of those are getting solved, right? So the problem is, like I said before, there were actual instances when we had to order machines, 8 months in advance of, building the product. And we didn't even know what the product would do, but, you just knew that machines would be hard to come by. So let's get something out, right? So to the counterpoint there, now is so quick. All of this is so rapid. That's not going to be a problem. That is an engineering challenge, but it's not the biggest unknown, right? It's something you can, work your way through if you're careful about it and do a good job. But here you're talking about the unknowns, right? What would people want? How would they want to consume it? So de-risking that is probably it's possible to do, I think, is the key point here.
Yeah, much more than it was. And let's speak to, specific to cloud. Were there any failures for you that come to mind? Maybe things you would have done differently, or mistakes that you've made in building these products or leveraging cloud?
Yeah, I think there's always failures. That's nothing without failures. I would say in general, as a company, we've done pretty well in course correcting, right? But we for all the advice, we fell prey to building some of these features in a little more depth than needed ahead of time. So it was sadly to wasted effort, right? In some sense, there's been more than one example. Like initially, I'd say in the building of the database itself. We said we would, build a new SQL API that kind of looks like Postgres, and we would emulate it. And we thought, look, we can just write this from scratch and do it really quickly. And how hard could that be? And then it turned out we saw that Postgres had 30 years of development, and there's really no way to do that. And so, this was 6 months after we, embarked on building it ourselves that we realized, look, there's no winning here. There's no way we could reach what Postgres has done and catch up in any meaningful fashion. It'd be 10, 15 years, we'd still be doing the same thing because Postgres is building even more, right? So the only way to leapfrog this is to take up Postgres' own code base. So we abandoned our 6 months of effort and said, look, back to the drawing board. Let's do it. It's, easier to talk about, but much harder to do because it's 6 months of very real work by a lot of people. And, it's the emotional investment, the actual work that we had to reset. So yes, so it was not without its trials, but, it's, the thing about failures is it's best to recognize them early on and best to, reward and recognize people that worked on it, even if it was the wrong path, because they helped in figuring out which way we should not be going. And it's not without its own technical challenges, right? So overall, that's a second bit. And then the third bit is to course correct really quickly, right? So those are the things like for example, even if we go down a path, sometimes knowingly that is exploratory and sometimes unknowingly, it's still important to reward the team that did it, because they did a fascinating job of actually unlocking the hardest problem, which we thought was very simple, right? Hey, what else is there a different way to do this? Of course, this is how you go. And then you get challenged and you get your basics questioned, and they've done a great job of uncovering that aha, right? So
yeah, and in order to find out where you want to go as a company or an individual, a lot of times you have to learn where not to go.
exactly.
And that part of the journey is true, across the board, but oftentimes, not realized.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
So to finish things off, if I'd like to learn more about your team's work, Yugabyte Cloud, where do you recommend I get started?
Well, there's our website, yugabyte.com, and there's our documentation. We take great pride in our documentation, so docs.yugabyte.com. And there's our community Slack. There's like about 4,000 other folks in there. So, any questions asked, someone will get back in a heartbeat. And, it's pretty great discussions all around there. And there's the free tier on our cloud that you could just sign up to and, kick around with the product or download it and run it yourself. And it's all open source, so you can even check the code itself.
No, it's exciting. And Yugabyte, again, is also available via the GCP marketplace.
That's right.
And we're offering GCP customers credits to go in, try Yugabyte Cloud. We're excited about that launch. You can email them at cloud@yugabyte.com to receive your own personalized code. Karthik, want to thank you again for being a guest on the show. Appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks, Ryan. Really appreciate you. Thanks for having me.